First of all, I just wanted to say, thank you and welcome to the panel on the future of climate policy for those of you who are joining us. Just a little bit of stage setting, just so folks are aware. SB 254 passed in the last legislature and was signed into law by Governor Sisolak. And SB 254 really laid out very aggressive and ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets for the state. 28% reduction by 2025, 45% by 2030, and of course, net zero by 2050. And under our current set of policies and business as usual, we are going to fall short of all three of those targets. Consequently, we really need to be implementing additional policies so that we can meet those reduction targets. And it's not, of course, just about those targets. It's really about ensuring that our long-term future, it's brighter for our children and for our grandchildren, because what we do now is going to define what their future actually looks like. So what we did, or what happened, is the Governor Sisolak followed up on that with his executive order that was issued in November of 2019. And very specific component of that was to deliver a climate strategy to the state, which we were able to deliver on December 1st, so just a couple days ago. And I hope folks have had an opportunity to dig into it. It is a beast, but there's a lot of great content in there. And we had an awesome group of folks across the agencies and the system of higher education that were contributing to it. Now, there are a couple key points from the strategy, and there's one that is really relevant to this group of folks that we have here today. In order to fully decarbonize by 2050, it's going to require harmonization of policies across multiple sectors and multiple levels of governance, and engagement across all of Nevada with our communities, with private industry, and other stakeholders. So this, again, I think sets the stage for what we want to do today. So I'm Kristen Averyt, and I am the State Policy Coordinator, and I'd like to take this opportunity for our panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm just going to go with who's on my screen first. So Rebecca, would you like to take a moment?
Sure, thank you, Kristen, and thank you to the Chamber for including me in this panel. My name is Rebecca Wagner. I've been working in the energy industry for close to 25 years. A portion of which was in the geothermal industry. A huge chunk of that was nearly a decade at the Public Utilities Commission as a commissioner, and now as a private consultant working on energy policy and climate policy.
Thanks, Rebecca. All right, Helen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Helen Fillmore. I'm a councilwoman for the Washoe tribe, representing off-reservation tribal members. Our headquarters is in Gardnerville, Nevada, just south of Reno.
Thanks. Thanks, Helen. Okay, Tony.
Thank you, Dr. Tony Sanchez. It's a pleasure to be here with the Reno Chamber and all my fellow panelists today. I'm the Executive Vice President of Business Development and External Relations for NV Energy, where I've been about 14 years. Prior to that, I was counsel at the State Public Utility Commission, did a stint on Capitol Hill, as well as worked for one of our previous governors, Bob Miller, including 10 years of private practice representing a wide variety of energy-related clients. But real pleased to be here today and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Tony. And Alli?
Hi, I'm Alli Gold-Roberts, the Director of State Policy at Ceres. We're a national sustainability advocacy organization that works with companies and investors to build a more sustainable global economy. And we are thrilled to have worked with many Nevada companies on climate policy and renewable energy and energy efficiency policy, and thrilled to join today's discussion. Thanks so much.
Thanks. And certainly, last but not least, Councilman.
Thank you so much, Dr. I appreciate being here today. I am the Reno City Council member at large, so I serve the entirety of our city of Reno, and I'm just honored to be a part of the conversation today, talking a little bit more about what specific things the cities in our great state can do to help move the climate action policies forward.
Great. Well, thank you. So actually, I'm going to start with you, Councilman, for the first question. And when we think about climate change, one phrase that's kind of come up lately is that climate change has come home to Nevada. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the Reno+Sparks area in northern Nevada with respect to climate change.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's not good things that we're seeing. We're seeing an increase in frequency and intensity of wildfires. Obviously, in northern Nevada, here in Reno, we're in the western interface with wildfires. And as we move into those areas and encroach on them with human development, it tends to create an opportunity for disaster, which includes wildfire and degradation of our environmental areas, especially as it relates to wildlife. Obviously, the city of Reno is one of the fastest warming cities in the world, quite frankly, and that's an alarming thing. So as we build more concrete and more asphalt and just build more, we're warming significantly more. So the effects of climate change are real. They're human caused and they're catastrophic. So we've got to do what we can to make inroads into sustainable living, sustainable opportunities.
Thank you for that. So Tony, I want to turn to you. I kind of want to do a round robin, get everybody on the record on a couple points, and then we can kind of go back and cover a couple things. So Tony, given the state's commitment to zero emissions by 2050, can you talk a little bit about what NV Energy's plans are in terms of developing what that pathway or what that roadmap might look like?
Sure, Doctor. Those are aggressive goals, and they're ones that NV Energy is positioned to achieve. It's, I'd say advancing carbon reduction in Nevada is one of our main focus. It has been for several years now, but we do have a plan moving forward, and it starts with the development of additional transmission infrastructure in the state of Nevada. We have recently proposed the GreenLink project before our State Public Utility Commission. We're currently soon going to be reaching saturation points when it comes to the amount of solar energy that we can put into our system without having that infamous duck curve problem that California has, where they have excess, so much solar that they actually pay us to take it at certain times of the year. So we need to diversify our renewable resources. For a very long time, you heard Commissioner Wagner indicate her background in the geothermal industry. It has always been geothermal dependent, and we're going to continue our investments in geothermal energy. But we need access to hydro, we need access to wind. And so the GreenLink project that's currently pending will allow us to build transmission between the greater Reno area and southern Nevada on the western border. It allows us to access solar energy zones where it's been identified by the Department of Energy during the Obama administration as prime areas for solar resource development, but they don't have access to transmission. So we're going to continue in those efforts. We're also going to continue to develop more renewable energy. We currently have several RFPs out right now. We have close to 3,000 megawatts of solar energy under development, and much of which has been already approved by the PUC. So those will all be coming online in the next couple of years. We've certainly met the portfolio standard and exceeded it for the past 10 years. We're currently at about 28% statewide. Well in excess of the 20% where we need to be today, but we're always looking forward to the next tranche that we have to meet. We can never meet the portfolio standard exactly. It has to be. We have to have a healthy cushion, and we're going to continue in that effort. But we also need more battery storage. We have 1,000 megawatts of lithium battery storage right now under development. One of the fastest growing portfolios in the entire country, and we're going to continue that. But we need access to other forms of storage too. We're looking at pumped hydro. There's many types of storage that we're going to look at, and so we're going to continue that. And then the fourth piece to reach these aggressive goals is an electrification strategy. We're very supportive of efforts, and we believe this will be a main topic at the next legislative session to enhance the backbone of the infrastructure that's going to allow for a transition from carbon emitting cars. And let's take care of this tailpipe problem. In Washoe County, 25% of the carbon is from tailpipes, and those are just enormous amounts. Over the past 15 years, we've reduced our carbon from coal by 85%, and then the remainder that'll be gone in the next 4 years. We've also reduced our carbon overall statewide 50% just from the utility industry. So we've, and a lot of that Commissioner Wagner was at the forefront of during her tenure at the commission. And so we've gotten a lot of that low-hanging fruit, but now we have to look at electrification, and that's one of the tenets, and I appreciate the work, Dr. Averyt, that you put into the state climate plan and the strategy. Is you recognize at the outset that the utility industry is not just the only emitter of carbon. We have to look at it holistically, and that's the only way we're going to get to 100% decarbonization, which is our goal.
Right. You know, these economy-wide solutions we have, I mean, not just in Nevada, but across the US and really globally, made significant inroads in terms of reducing emissions from the energy sector. And there are going to be, of course, challenges ahead to get to net zero. You know, coal-fired retirements, there are a lot of market drivers in there. So we have a long way to go, particularly with natural gas. So Rebecca, you know, I know you are an energy expert. And so, but I know that you're working on much larger issues. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what Tony really teed up in terms of those, what are the opportunities within other sectors of the economy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Great, thank you for the question. And I always love to follow Tony. So I'll see if I can raise his blood pressure in some way, because that's kind of how we roll. We actually are off to a really good start with the electric sector. And in my opinion, that creates the cornerstone for what we need to accomplish to reduce emissions from the transportation sector, which is 35% of our emissions. And thank you for all the information in your amazing report. I'm still reading it, looking for the audio version of that as well. And as well as buildings account for 10% of our emissions. So that would be the burning of fossil fuels like gas, propane, heating oil, for space heating, and water heating and cooking. So to me, the next big opportunity, and Tony alluded to it, is electrification. And electrification is only as good as what our utility can provide in terms of clean energy. So we are on our way. It has not been an easy path, but we have the momentum on this right now, especially with the economics behind it. So that really gives us the opportunity to turn towards electrification of transportation. And it's complicated. It is not easy to move to say everybody should have electric vehicles. We don't have a requirement for electric vehicles in Nevada, so there is a shortage of customer choice on EVs. I just recently purchased a plug-in hybrid in California. That kills me that we have to go out of state to be able to shop for something that we know is good for us. So policies like the LEV and ZEV, zero emission vehicles, and low emission vehicle standards that NDEP is currently looking at are critically important to transition our transportation sector, but also to create that secondary market so that EVs are available for everyone, not just people who can afford a brand new car, which I don't know how many people actually buy new cars these days. It's certainly rare in my household. And then the two other pieces to transportation electrification is the infrastructure. And that's what I believe Tony was suggesting, is we need to be able to charge our vehicles in our homes, at our businesses, in public areas. And that's going to create more demand on the electric system, but it's the cleaner version. But we don't have a lot of access right now, so we're going to have to ramp that up. And then finally, we need to incentivize people to purchase electric vehicles. I'm sworn do-gooder and I try to do the right thing, but at some point we need some incentives to get more people to drive electric, or continuing to reduce vehicle miles traveled is also a critical component. And then turning to the building sector quickly, first and foremost, I am a huge supporter of energy efficiency, and that should always be one of the biggest tools in our arsenal. Yes, we're going to be relying more on NV Energy's electric system, but let's be smart and efficient with our use of energy. If we can continue to reduce our consumption and utilize it smartly, we have a better opportunity to utilize the grid to its maximum capacity without creating additional issues or problems that we see with oversupply or lack of generation. The couple of the areas when we look at buildings, it's really, we have the opportunities through energy efficiency and the utility programs, but we really need to start looking at burning of fossil fuels in our homes and buildings. And I think that the strategy is laid out kind of the framework for that conversation. It's not easy to solve, and I don't think anybody's suggesting a ban on gas, but we need to start thinking about what infrastructure we put in and what that looks like in 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And then also turning to building codes. We need to upgrade our building codes to look towards the future with electric vehicle infrastructure built in. All electric home, maybe not as a mandate, but certainly as an option for customers. And then in terms of retrofit, looking at things like appliance standards and going to energy efficiency upgrades after completing an energy audit. There's a lot of things that we can do to make our homes and our businesses more efficient and more comfortable, better workspace, reducing costs and being able to put those dollars to work elsewhere. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm only touching on a few key policies, but we have some time, but we don't have time. So I'll stop there and turn to other panelists.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we're going to get back to what Rebecca said, because she enumerated so many different things here that I'm really interested in what people feel about or think about with respect to what different levels of governance and what private industry can do to address some of those issues. But Helen, I wanted to ask you, when I think about the tribal communities across Nevada and more generally, the tribes have made incredible inroads in terms of planning around climate resilience and climate adaptation. For example, dealing with drought, dealing with exacerbated drought in the future, and other, other issues really that are focused on natural resources and the like. And I would actually argue, in doing some of the research for the climate strategy, we're like, wow, the tribes in the state are actually further ahead than most of our other communities. But on the climate mitigation side, I'm very interested in the environmental justice component and perspectives from Indigenous populations. In our climate strategy, we didn't design our own policies. We pulled policies that came from another document, and we're really trying to figure out, and we were trying to set the stage for, hey, here are the issues related to a particular policy, where you could craft a policy that incorporates environmental justice concerns and addresses social disparities. So I'm really curious about how, your perspective on that, how that might play out, and how do we meaningfully integrate social justice concerns for marginalized communities into our policy sphere, Indigenous populations and more broadly. I wonder if you have some perspectives you could share.
Yeah, definitely. So I think you do make a really valid point that Indigenous communities across Nevada and even at a much wider region have in a lot of ways been raising the alarm about climate change for, and I'm going to say decades now at this point, because I know that with my tribe, we've definitely been talking about, the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation on our resources for a really long time. So in some ways we are lucky because we don't have, I guess, this learning curve as far as trying to educate our, constituents, or trying to educate our population about the impacts of climate change, to get them to act, or to get them to be willing to take on, I guess, or support measures that really do kind of contribute to our collective experience within this. We have the opposite, where our communities are very aware, are experiencing these changes, and are wondering what we're going to be doing to address these. At the same time, we are such a small population, Indigenous people, but I would even say, people of color in general, that we are disproportionately being impacted by climate change, but there's not very much that we can do to mitigate it. We don't have a lot of options, because it doesn't matter, if all of our population moved to electric vehicles and went off grid and, went into a more sustainable lifestyle. There's that isn't going to mitigate climate the climate change itself on a much broader scale. And so I think when we're thinking about environmental justice, we not only need to be talking about these long-range planning issues, but we need to be talking about the communities that are disproportionately affected by this. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities for coordination across communities to be able to deal with this. I'll give one example right now. In the city of Reno, we look at affordable housing, right? And affordable housing, climate change is impacting us in a lot of ways, but if transportation is creating 35% of emissions, and we're creating jobs, which is a great thing in our region, but when there's not affordable housing for people to live within the region, they're moving elsewhere. And then that increases that impact of CO2 emissions through transportation. And so right now, I believe that there's a recent study that came out, or maybe it's a few years old now, but 50% of Lyon County residents are commuting to Washoe County to go to work. And so that's a huge population when you're looking at Lyon County. They might only make up, a small percentage of the Washoe County workforce, but that's a lot of vehicle traffic on our roads that are contributing to climate change in a much bigger way. And when you think about affordable housing, it's our most disadvantaged communities. It's our communities of color who are getting priced out of this market, of our housing market, when there's this higher increase. And so it's not only about modernizing our infrastructure, but making sure that we're not leaving out the people that are being impacted the most. When we talk about wildfires, we also have to look at the disproportionate impacts that lower air quality has on people of color. The highest rates of asthma are in Black communities and American Indian communities. And so these are significant issues. I think it's a lot easier for us to raise these alarms because we are more connected to the impacts of climate change. But at the same time, we can't come up, we aren't going to have all of the solutions. And that's the area where we really need to be able to work together in much better ways and more effective ways to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our collective society, right? Climate change isn't a Nevada issue, it's a world issue. And so we all need to be at the table, and we all need to be on board to help each other.
Thank you, Helen, I appreciate that. So Alli, we're gonna kind of bounce around here a little bit, as I mentioned. So the business community really recognizes that climate change is a risk. To quote Michael Brown, the head of the Governor's Office of Economic Development, GOED has identified climate change as one of the most significant threats and opportunities facing the state's economy. And to quote Ann Silver, might recognize the name, Nevada's natural resources can be an economic driver, and we need to plan for a climate-friendly, low-carbon economy now. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the economic opportunities and perhaps the co-benefits and the benefits that this could bring, particularly in light of COVID and the impacts that it's had.
Absolutely. And thank you, and congrats on getting the report out. You must be breathing a sigh of relief. So it's great to be with all of you and to follow Helen. She ended on talking about the global impacts. And I'll just say globally, companies are really taking climate change very seriously, and that this is certainly, a local issue, but I think businesses across the US and globally are really deeply committed to science-based targets. So not just, worrying about their own operations, but really thinking about what efforts are needed to align with the latest climate science and meet the Paris Climate Accord and beyond, ideally. More than 1,000 companies have or are in the process of setting these science-based targets, including 200 headquartered in the US, and of course, major Nevada brands like AT&T, Caesars, Levi's, Mars, Patagonia, PayPal, Starbucks, I can go on. But to your question, Dr. Averyt, businesses recognize the risks climate change poses to them, to their long-term economic success, the health and livelihood of their communities, the health and well-being of their employees and customers, and of course, the disruptions to their supply chains. They also, of course, recognize the opportunity, and with it, as we think about recovery and COVID, I think that's a really important way to frame this conversation. And I really appreciate Rebecca bringing up energy efficiency, which are inherently local jobs. They cannot be exported, which, I'm sure we could spend a lot of time on. But we know that renewable energy and energy efficiency gives companies greater control and predictability over their energy costs. So I really obviously appreciate the great work that Tony and his team are doing, and that obviously saves ratepayers money. But also, the conversation around transportation is really important, and we've seen companies engaging on the Advanced Clean Cars program and recognize that this is a huge opportunity for Nevada. EVs provide fuel and maintenance cost savings. They attract customers and encourage them to stay longer. Also, workplace charging is used to help attract and retain talent. And we know that our retailers love any excuse to have people stay in their stores longer. So if they're charging their vehicles in the parking lot, we know our friends at IKEA and Target and others are really thinking about this for their customers and for their employees. So to kind of round out the question, I would just say companies are raising their voices and supporting policy solutions because they have a significant interest in finding ways to systemically improve emissions performance of the overall economy, not just their own facilities. And they see the need to adopt strong, comprehensive policies that send clear long-term economic signals. And, I think the many policies that are included in the strategy are hopefully an incredible place for us to get to work and really roll up our sleeves and businesses to be part of the solution.
Great, thanks for that. So, Helen, I thought you did a really nice job of just talking about the interconnectedness. What happens in our urban communities does impact rural communities and vice versa, and that we're all in this together in terms of addressing these challenges. So when we think about it, most urban areas in general are responsible for over 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And so, Councilman, you mentioned the urban heat island, which is compounding what we're seeing with respect to climate change. And at least in Southern Nevada, there's a very clear connection where the poorest families basically live in the hottest parts of town. And in any given day, there can be a 10 to 15 degree difference between one part of town and another. So Reno's not immune to this either. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the city's role is in, whether it's specific to urban heat island, but more generally in terms of how this opportunity to really help marginalized communities and homeless population, as well as touch on some of the issues Helen highlighted.
Well, I think the first thing is acknowledging that climate impacts are a social justice issue. Right? That is not always how we have framed climate science or climate action, but it is how I think a lot of the conversations are now being centered and refocused. So acknowledging that, I think, is a good first step. The second thing is, and I think one of the questions in the chat box is really appropriate and really speaks to this, and that is, how do you balance the competing concerns that any kind of city or municipal entity will have, especially as it comes to building codes and what we want to do to positively affect a reduction in, these kind of harmful emissions. And so I'll give you an example. At the City of Reno next week on Wednesday, we have revisions to Title 18, which is a very massive undertaking that's been taking place over the last basically 18 months. And it's involved a lot of stakeholders. And quite frankly, I'm not sure it's perfect. But as we say often in government, don't try and make perfect the enemy of good. Right? There are things in that which will have, I think, important impacts, but it doesn't do everything that everyone believes would be appropriate. And so it is constantly a struggle between doing what is appropriate and responsible for our planet, but also understanding the impacts economically that it has on people who are building, because of course we need housing for the number of people who are moving here. I have been working with the Citizen Climate Lobby here in Northern Nevada to talk about the things we can do, but really it just takes everyone, all hands on deck, using every tool they have in the toolbox and a willingness to make that extra effort. And so, opportunities like this, the Chamber of Commerce, getting business folks to be behind a thing, I think is part of that conversation too. And I think we'll get there. It's going to be tight though. I mean, whatever we do now, I think is going to have massive effects on our children and our grandchildren. And I'm hopeful that we can reverse some of the catastrophic effects that we've wrought on our planet.
Thank you for that. So I want to touch on it. Thank you for pointing out the questions in the chat. Sorry about that. Nice work. Go team. So I actually do want to touch there's a good question here about that I would characterize as one of the really complex, sticky issues to navigate with respect to climate change. And it's we have a growing population, we have development occurring, and we want to balance that with energy efficiency and not, as it's characterized here, overly burdensome regulations. I wonder if maybe Alli or Rebecca could talk a little bit about that. You know, there's economic growth, there's population expansion, et cetera, and just kind of some general comments on those kind of sticky issues, if you will.
I can start if Rebecca, you want to pile on. I would just say, you know, in particular, I think, you know, building codes are a really incredible opportunity, and state and local governments can adopt the International Energy Conservation Codes, which include electric vehicle infrastructure and all electric ready outlets for cooking and heating appliances. We know that retrofitting buildings later can be extremely expensive, and doing those upgrades. And of course, you know, we should really be thinking more long-term about the future of gas infrastructure. As we invest in those kinds of resources, what are the implications of those potential stranded assets as we work towards electrification? So we have a ton of companies that we work with who are really starting to look at, you know, electrifying buildings and building decarbonization as a serious priority. And one of the major legs of the stool, I would say transportation and buildings are the two legs that really need some love, and a place where we need to create choice in the marketplace. It's not about burdensome regulations, it's about giving people the opportunity and putting those codes in place so that people can make those choices and make those investments up front if they want to do that work.
Rebecca, do you want to add anything there?
No, Alli hit it for me is on the customer choice part of it, and I recognize, like, it's crazy in Reno how fast the building is going, and it always feels like we're playing catch up. But at some point we need to take stock in our housing stock and the buildings we're building, and it's like, does this make the most sense on future scenarios? And if we can start making incremental changes, especially ones that could be and should be consumer driven, which really means that there's a lot of education that needs to happen on both any kind of electrification, whether it's transportation or in buildings. But at some point we have to start looking at it, and instead of just saying, oh, we'll get to that. It's just really hard. And I don't envy local government officials at all on this, because they're the ones who are feels like the tip of the spear on so much of this policy. It's where the rubber meets the road, and it's challenging.
No, I completely understand. And, you know, one of the things to also think about is over 40% of the people that live in Nevada are renters. They don't own their homes. And in a larger percentage of that population tend to be the low-income households, as well as communities of color. And so, you know, I think not just thinking about the building, but really how do we incent the retrofit for the landlords, et cetera. So I just wanted to add that component in there. So Tony, you talked a little bit about the kind of the large scale transmission and the build out, et cetera. I'm curious, I think we oftentimes think about climate mitigation and reducing greenhouse gases very separate from impacts. And so I'm kind of curious about, for example, planning a big transmission line, you know, where wildfires are now, they might be in different places in the future, et cetera. So I'm kind of curious from a risk profile and long-term climate change, how these really significant investments, particularly in infrastructure, how they contemplate the impacts of climate change and how things might change and how people might move. I'm curious what your perspectives on that.
Well, I mean, to your point about a major project like the Green Link, which is a $2 billion project, but I mean, that's driving us towards, you know, getting to be 100% carbon free. So, I mean, that's the overarching goal of that, as well as to help the state's economy from a perspective of not only the 4,000 to 5,000 jobs that would be involved over the next decade in building that, but at the same time allowing for a renewable energy industry to finally get to a position of exporting these commodities. That's not something that we do. We certainly participate in the energy imbalance market, and we trade energy with surrounding states, but we're not in the business of selling energy at a state. So the transmission infrastructure that we're proposing is revolutionary. It is going to really enhance reliability for the entire state. It's going to help, with respect to the economics of the state. And, it's very exciting. The first proposed phase of it is, again, from Las Vegas up to the Yerington area. The second phase would be Yerington over to Ely. So you'd have that interconnection with our existing line that we built. That it took several years to do the online. And that has been a tremendous success, but that one's full. And so it just shows what the demand is. Obviously, there are different developers from around the country that want to get their power to Nevada, and they want to get it through Nevada because we're at a strategic location. So that's why we have so much focus on GreenLink and in regards to the future of decarbonizing our grid.
Thanks for that. So I want to pivot back to Helen and talk a little bit, I think, and this kind of a pivot also on the resilience component. What do you think, we know that the Washoe have a plan on climate and are addressing that. What do you think are lessons that we can learn and take away from how you all have been, I say you, but how Washoe and other tribes have been addressing issues around climate change? I mean, are there lessons learned that, again, recognizing y'all have done a lot more than we have? So I'm kind of curious what you think.
Well, I would say that I think one of the directions that I hope that we can all move forward in a better way is long-term coordinated planning. And so a lot of times, whether it's, a lot of times we're thinking on how to create solutions to the impacts we're feeling right now, or create some of the relief to the impacts that we're feeling right now. And we have a lot of different types of impacts, depending on our communities. But I think creating more opportunities for long-term and very strategic planning and making sure that it is really coordinated. When it comes to tribal lands, when it comes to state lands, when we come to these multiple jurisdictions, right? When wildfires don't know state boundaries, it doesn't matter how, even when we're not experiencing the fires themselves, we're impacted by the smoke. And so those were, I guess, those are things that we don't necessarily, that we might not be able to predict on the way to really address it. But what I think we do too often is look at short-sighted impacts and try to address those short-sighted issues rather than looking at the opportunities to look beyond, 5, 10, 20 years, even looking beyond that level, and make sure that we are coordinating across jurisdictions and coordinating across entities so that, it's not just what the environmentalists want, it's not just what the tribes want, it's not just what, the businesses want, but make sure that we're finding those opportunities to work together at that longer time scale. One thing I'll mention too is that I kind of often come back to is what I think my generation wants is a lot different than what younger generations want too. And so sometimes I feel like we're planning on a scale for within our lifetimes. The generations before us were planning on a scale of within their lifetimes, but younger generations have different priorities too, and they're going to become, filling our seats in a lot faster rate than I think we're ready for that to happen. And so, we see how much changes in such a short time, but I think those next generations are really pushing us to act a lot faster and to react in a lot bigger ways than I think I was even expecting 5 years ago.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, there we go. I like that. No, that's so true. Having the opportunity to work with students, I see so much of that. There's just this, people really want to get moving and students understand it and they see the implications for their future and their children's future. So I really appreciate that. So what you started saying is music to my ears with respect to your key point about long-term collaboration and coordination. And it takes a lot of different people and different levels at the table. And a little biased because that was one of the key points in our climate strategy. Nice little plug there once again. But so Councilman, kind of teeing off that, what do you see as the opportunities for the cities, municipalities, et cetera, like for collaboration in the Reno+Sparks area to address some of these climate change issues, whether mitigation, whether resilience? I mean, and can you give me any examples?
Yeah, I think the examples that are coming down the pike are going to be what we do with the public lands bill potentially, because it will dramatically impact where we build, ultimately how we build. As we build up north of Reno, we're having a lot of strange and complicated issues that arise with water and water policy. And so as a region, we're going to have to address those regionally because what we do affects Washoe County, affects Sparks. And sometimes that can be frustrating for me as an elected official because I don't get to make all the rules and tell everybody else what to do. So it has to be collaborative. It has to be reaching across the aisle. You know, our earth does not care about your political affiliation or persuasion. It does not care about a lot of things, but what it cares about is a healing. And so ultimately, I think those are going to be the examples that we'll be looking at in the next several months. And very fortunately, Lynn Barker led the charge, David Bobzian led the charge about our climate sustainability plan, and now carrying it to action is going to be key. It's been difficult because, you know, the pandemic has really sidetracked a lot of the energy that we had that was positively building around that. So we're going to have to get back on track. And I think we can.
That's great. And I love the positive note. So to kind of wrap things up. So we've got 2 minutes. So I want to do a really quick round robin and get 5 words from each of you. 5, there's a limit, on what you think we need to do and prioritize, or what you think is important to get to net zero by 2050. I'm going to put you on the spot, Rebecca.
Great.
Go first.
Ingenuity, collaboration, coordination, some forgiveness, and hard work.
I like forgiveness. Alli, let's call on you now.
Public-private partnership. That gives me only 2 more left. Definitely collaboration and innovation, no question.
Great. Tony.
I was just so much clean energy opportunity.
Good, I like that. All right. And then Councilman?
Don't be afraid to fail.
I like that. And Helen?
So I would say long-term envisioning and the collaborative planning.
Wonderful. Well, I would say to everybody participating, you know, give a hand to so I will clap for all of you and on behalf of everybody participating. And thank you all for sharing your perspectives and taking the time today. I think this was a really great discussion and hopefully fodder for future discussions in the spirit of long-term collaboration and coordination. So thank you.